World's coolest agent was mourning for his old friend, yet next second, thankfully, it was just a scratch. Quickly decided to flee. As he reached a stone bridge, a car suddenly appeared behind Bond, firing several shots at him. Sensing danger, Bond swiftly hid behind a stone pillar. The car missed him. Bond barely escaped, and the car sped past. Just then, a motorcycle came from the opposite direction, while the car drifted sharply and came back for another attack. They opened fire at Bond from both sides. Reacting quickly, Bond grabbed a rope hanging from the wall and leaped off, bungee jumping to the ground below. The motorcycle rider was stunned. Even from such a height, Bond was unharmed. Bond turned and ran at full speed, reaching 80 miles per hour thinking he might escape, but motorcycles are faster than legs. Soon, the rider cornered him in an alley. Bond charged at him, yanked the rider off the bike, and in just a few moves, subdued him. Then using a rope, Bond tied him up tightly. Before Bond could even ask why he was being hunted, the rider confessed on his own. It was your girlfriend who gave away your location. You're being hunted now. Bond was stunned. Furious, he knocked the rider unconscious, hitting him so hard that his fake eye popped out. Then, Bond got on the rider's motorcycle and sped toward the hotel. With a daring leap, he reached the upper level and made his way to the hotel entrance. Walking inside with a confident stride, Bond confronted his girlfriend. "Do you even know what I just went through? What's your connection to Spectre?" His girlfriend was completely stunned. Bond took a deep breath, calmed himself, and decided to leave. He got into his supercar outside, but Spectre was already in pursuit. Bond floored it, drifting and weaving to shake them off. His girlfriend, terrified, watched as another car came straight at them. Bond drifted sharply, throwing out a barrage of small bombs. While his girlfriend kept trying to explain, another car suddenly rammed them from the side, bringing them to a stop. Enemies surrounded them from all directions, unloading bullets on Bond's car. Luckily, Bond's car was bulletproof. His girlfriend was terrified, but Bond stayed calm under pressure. Then the one-eyed man showed up again, even more vicious despite missing an eye. He fired relentlessly at the passenger seat where Bond's girlfriend sat. She screamed in fear, calling out Bond's name repeatedly. Bond was still consumed by the anger of being betrayed by his girlfriend. She shouted at him, telling him to do something quickly. Just as the glass was about to be shot through, Bond immediately activated the car's attack mode. The headlights instantly transformed into Gatling guns. He spun the car in place, unleashing a rapid barrage that left the enemies stunned. Then he released a smoke screen, using the cover to make a quick getaway. Before long, they arrived at the train station. Bond sent his girlfriend onto the train. She had something to say.
How will I know that you're okay?
You won't.
What Bond didn't know was that his girlfriend was already carrying his child. Time flashed forward 5 years. A group of henchmen clung to the glass windows of a skyscraper, planning to steal the lab's bioweapons. What Spectre didn't realize was that stealing the bioweapons would ultimately backfire, forcing the retired Bond back into action. The villains blasted through the defense system, killing everyone in sight and taking control of the lab staff. They found the insider and took the nano-bioweapon. The lab system detected unauthorized access and immediately sealed all the exits. Spectre responded by throwing a magnetic bomb into the elevator shaft, escaping the lab and destroying it to cover their tracks. News of the lab explosion quickly reached MI6, and MM immediately assigned the new 007 to retrieve the nano-weapon and capture the scientist. Meanwhile, Bond's old friend contacted him, telling him Spectre had stolen a cutting-edge weapon from the lab. Hearing it was Spectre again, Bond muttered, "Those idiots." He decided to take them down once and for all. Bond came out of retirement and met up with Paloma, the agent tasked with assisting him. They had intel that the scientist and Spectre would meet at a gala for the exchange. Sure enough, the scientist and the one-eyed man were upstairs at the gala making the deal. Bond moved through the lively crowd, but suddenly the spotlight landed on him, instantly making him the center of attention. Then, an unknown liquid sprayed down from the ceiling. Spectre agents began collapsing one after another. Bond was stunned. It turned out to be DNA nanorobots. Once programmed to target someone's DNA, they could kill the target with precision. Spectre had planned to use it to kill Bond, but the scientist had secretly swapped the programming, matching it to Spectre's DNA instead. So, Spectre's agents all became victims. At that moment, Bond spotted the scientist. Bond grabbed a plate and hurled it like a frisbee, knocking the scientist to the ground. They brought the scientist to the main hall, teaming up to catch Spectre off guard. But just then, the new 007 intercepted them and took the scientist away. Bond rushed out of the hall, chasing after her. She performed a stunt move, but Bond made a precise shot, hitting the anchor point dead on. Paloma stayed behind to cover Bond's escape. Her moves were smooth and effortless. After taking down the henchman, she got into the car. The scientist tried to escape while 007 was in combat, but Bond's partner floored the gas, knocked over a tree stump, and captured the scientist again. After an intense fight, they temporarily secured the scientist. Bond said goodbye to Paloma and flew off with the scientist to meet his friend. When they reached the boat, Bond began interrogating the scientist, but it turned out Felix was a spy. He and the scientist had been bought off by the villain, Safin. Safin planned to use the weapon to destroy humanity. Felix suddenly fired at Bond, but Bond's friend took the bullet instead. Bond rushed forward and civilly fought Felix. After a quick and intense struggle, Felix, realizing he was losing, pulled out a hidden gun. Bond dodged, fell into the ship's hold, and got locked in. He glanced at his injured friend and quickly pressed a hand against the wound to stop the bleeding. Then he went to search for an exit, but suddenly, Felix had rigged the ship to explode and escaped with the scientist. Bond was awakened by rushing water. He shouted desperately, looking for his friend, as the situation turned dire. The cabin began flooding quickly. Bond found his friend and tried to pull him up. The ship was about to be swallowed by the sea, and his friend wasn't doing well. With his last words, "Having you as a friend made it all worth it." Then he passed away. Furious, Bond swore to bring down the spies and wreak havoc on them. In the critical moment, Bond dove into the water without hesitation to find an exit. The ship continued to sink slowly. When he found the exit, it was sealed shut. The water pressure was too great to open it, and Bond was already at his limit. The instinct to survive. Bond gave it everything he had. As the ship quickly sank, Bond finally pushed the door open. With all his strength, he barely escaped alive. Then, enraged, Bond threw off the tarp covering his car, jumped in, and sped off from the garage. He drove straight to Belmarsh prison to confront the leader of Spectre. Coincidentally, Bond's girlfriend was also at Belmarsh. Just moments earlier, Madeline had sprayed nanorobots onto her wrist in the restroom. Safin had forced her to use the nanobio weapon to kill the head of Spectre, threatening her with her daughter's life. When Bond arrived at Belmarsh, he ran into Madeline. Together, they went to meet the Spectre leader. But Madeline suddenly changed her mind. Inadvertently, Bond grabbed her hand, transferring the nanorobots to his own skin. Bond began interrogating the Spectre leader. "Tell me everything. If you cooperate, I might spare your life." The leader refused to answer and instead told Bond, "5 years ago, Madeline didn't betray your location. I had my men deceive you. The grave bomb, that was my doing." Enraged, Bond suddenly grabbed the leader by the throat, but he let go shortly after. Furious, Bond watched as the leader accidentally died. Later, Bond learned that once nanorobots make contact, they stay in the body forever. However, they only target specific DNA matches. Then Bond went to Madeline to apologize. After a heartfelt confession, the two were about to play cards when Madeline's daughter suddenly called out, "Mom!" That's when Bond realized he had a daughter. Soon after, Bond received a call from his colleague, warning him that Safin was leading a large force toward them. Bond immediately grabbed his wife and daughter, and they fled in the car. Safin's forces caught up and rammed into Bond's car, attempting to trap him in a pincer attack. Bond quickly swerved left, toppling one vehicle, then swerved right, sending another car up a slope. By now, enemy forces from land, sea, and air had arrived. Bond sped across the open plains, trying to escape. The pursuers relentlessly chased him. Bond made a sharp left turn, flipping one car over. But the situation remained dire as the cars behind him refused to back off. With a sharp right turn, Bond temporarily lost most of them. To avoid the helicopters overhead, Bond drove into the forest. Then he told his wife and daughter to hide in a thatched hut while he went out alone to lure the enemies. Bond switched to a grenade launcher. Hearing the noise, an enemy car sped toward him. Bond fired a single grenade, obliterating the car. He followed up with a few quick shots for good measure. Then Bond pulled out a winch cable and wrapped it around the trees to set a trap. When a motorcycle roared in, suddenly a spy appeared and began firing wildly at Bond. Realizing their bullets weren't working, the spy tried to ram Bond with a car, but Bond spun out of the way and kept firing relentlessly. Meanwhile, Safin found Bond's wife and daughter and took them away. By the time Bond arrived, they were already gone. Furious, Bond clenched his fists. "You mess with my family, I'll tear your world apart." Then Bond and Nomi immediately piloted the aircraft, racing towards Safin's stronghold. Safin's nanobot manufacturing base was located on an island, where he planned to use nanobots to control the world. By then, Bond had already infiltrated the island. Using his EMP watch, he disabled all surveillance. Meanwhile, Nomi activated the scanner, revealing the entire layout of the island. Following the map, they found the bioweapon storage room. If activated, it would cause mass panic, so they planted bombs there. Then Bond went to search for his wife and daughter. At that moment, a soldier was forcing Madeline to drink poison. Madeline suddenly splashed the poison onto the soldier, she ran right into Bond, who was looking for her. Meanwhile, Safin was holding Bond's daughter. Suddenly, she bit him hard. He left the girl behind, calculating his next move instead. Luckily, Bond quickly found his daughter. Then he told Nomi to escort his wife and daughter to safety while he stayed behind to destroy the base. At this point, Bond fought like a one-man army. Then Bond contacted headquarters to launch missiles and level the island. But Safin activated the missile defense system. Bond immediately headed to the control room to disable it, only to be ambushed by Safin, who shot him. Realizing he had no other choice, Bond engaged Safin in a brutal fight. But Safin managed to inject Bond with a bioweapon. The virus, encoded with Madeline's DNA, would kill both her and their daughter if Bond ever touched them. Devastated, Bond shot and killed Safin. Then Bond, dragging his severely injured body, forced himself to reach the control room and disable the defense system. With great difficulty, he climbed to the top of the base. On the rooftop, Bond used a satellite phone to say his final goodbye to his wife. He told her about the virus, and she immediately burst into tears, pleading with him, saying there had to be a cure. Bond stood up and looked toward the sky. Leaving can be beautiful too. Then he simply told her, "I love you." She replied, "I love you too." Moments later, countless missiles rained down from the sky. And just like that, James Bond, the legend, was gone.